She remembers being taken into like a lodge type setting, like a moose lodge or an elk's lodge or something like that. And that the men were wearing masks, different types of masks and animal masks. They wanted her to renounce God, to say that God wasn't real, God didn't exist. And she had to say that God wasn't real and God wasn't going to help her. And she had to repeat this over and over again. She said that she was forced to defecate on a Bible, urinate on a Bible. Okay, my godfather, shortly after I was born, apparently gave me the gift of a baby bunny rabbit, a white baby bunny named Chimo. And we grew up together, me and Chimo. I remember being in a cage with Chimo in the basement on the floor. I had no clothes on, and the only comfort I had was that rabbit. Hugging that rabbit, curled up, sleeping with that rabbit on the floor. And just the comfort of his fur, the comfort of his warmth. And I was about 4 or 5 years old. We had babysitters come in. These babysitters were teenagers. I don't know where my parents were. I don't know where any adults were. But these babysitters were vicious. They were abusive as well to both my brother and I, the times that they had babysat in the past. Well, this particular night I'm wearing a nightie. They had thrown me down on the floor and pulled my nightie up over my face. And then they put the rabbit down on my chest and they pulled the nightie back down so I could see what they were doing. They said, give him one more hug, say goodbye to Chimo. And they lifted up Chimo and they slashed him open. And all of his insides fell out on top of me. And they said, don't tell anybody about this. Cross your heart, hope to die, stick a needle in your eye if you tell anybody. And I said, I won't tell anyone, I won't tell anyone. And they had the knife that they cut him with, and they cut my chest. They put a cross on my chest with the knife. I still have the scar on my chest to this day from where they did that, and they said that they would do to me what they did to Chimo if I ever told anybody about what had happened. I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, was born in Manitoba, in Winnipeg. My journey has been a confusing one, crazy one that most people would not want to believe is real. My family is riddled and has been ripped apart by these issues. And so it hits very close to home. Has affected both my parents, their siblings, my cousins, my brother, myself. And because of the amount of trauma that I've been through and trying to overcome, it's also affected my children.
You talked some about what it was like growing up in your house, and you talked about the time that you were forced to be in your room by yourself with no water, with no food. Okay, can you share a little bit about that?
And I remember being older, 3, 4 years old, and I'd be in my room forever. It just felt like forever, and I didn't know if anybody was going to come and let me out of that bedroom. My brother was in his own room by that time, and his room was in the basement. Mine was upstairs. we'd be allowed out maybe around lunchtime, just before lunchtime, around 11 in the morning, to watch TV for an hour, to eat lunch, and then I'd be put back in my bedroom. And I remember calling out one time, I said, "Mom, can I come out now? Mom, can I come out now?" She came to the door and she says, "You will be let out when I say you can come out. Don't ask me again. If you ask again, I'm going to hurt you." She came in my face. She put her hand to my throat and she says, "I hate you. I wish you were never born. I don't want to look at you. I don't want to smell you. I don't want you in my face. I don't want to hear you. You just stay in your room and stay put until I say you can come out and I'm ready to tolerate your face." And she left the room. You don't dare move when you've been told that. And this second house here was the house I grew up in, 224. This bedroom on the end, that was my bedroom. And the one next to it was my brother's bed. I would have been about 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old. The phone rings and it was around lunchtime. So it would have been a point of the day when I was out of my room that the phone rang. My mom answered the phone and I was right beside her. I wanted to know who was on the phone. I was hoping company might be coming over. It was always nicer when company was over. A lot of the time we could actually interact with whoever was over, at least be out of our room. So I was excited to see who was on the phone. Well, my mom drops the phone. She doesn't hang it up. She dropped the phone. Started off a normal enough conversation, but then she just sort of blanked and dropped the phone. I'm leaning against this door that was across from the phone, and that door led into the basement. There was no knob on the door, but there was a latch. And she undid the latch and gave me a push, and I went through the door and went backwards down a set of wooden steps to the basement, banged my head on the concrete at the bottom, and I know I was laying on my leg out of its socket behind me. So I was injured pretty good. And remember my mom yelling, coming down the stairs, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I found that weird. Why would I be okay after her shoving me? She thought my back was broken and she was freaking out, ran upstairs. I don't know who she phoned. Okay, I know I was in and out of consciousness and just in pain and confused by what had happened. Next thing I know, I'm being put on a backboard and they're trying to be really careful. The EMS team, I guess. But when I came to, I wasn't in a normal place. I was in a hallway of some sort, and it didn't seem like a hospital. In hindsight, it didn't seem like a hospital at all. It was just this strange hallway. I tried to sit up in this crib that I was in, and it was a metal crib. And I grabbed onto the rails and tried to pull myself up, and it was sharp. It was digging into my hands. And so they were pushing down on me at the same time. So as soon as I tried to push up, they're shoving me down and saying, "Kimmy, don't move. You can't move. You have to hold really, really still." There are 4 or 5 people standing around the crib and holding my legs down and holding my shoulders down. And I felt this poking, just these sharp pokes going into my scalp. And it felt like needles going in, and they were taping them down. So there's like wires or something coming out of my head. Makes sense in hindsight, because if I banged my head, they're probably checking for concussion, checking for brain waves or whatever. So when I first started getting this memory back, to me that seemed normal enough. Well, the next phase of memory comes back, and the side of the crib is lowered, the side bars are lowered, and they're carrying me out of the crib, and they put me in a metal tub filled with ice water. And it was just absolutely shocking to my body. I know I was wearing something I had underwear on and like a tank top or a tank t-shirt of some kind. They submerged me in this ice water, and I'm screaming and yelling and trying to get away from what they were doing, but I couldn't get away from them. They take me out of the ice water and put me in another tub that was full of really hot water. And so the shock to my system again with the heat was just intense, and I'm screaming and yelling and trying to get away. They moved me from that tank back into the ice water, and they went back and forth like this between shocking cold and shocking hot. And my body was just screaming. I was screaming and yelling for it to stop and trying to pull away, but they had control of my limbs. Finally, I couldn't fight anymore. I just gave up fighting. There was no point. I lost the will to fight. I don't even know how to explain what happens. You just go limp. You just lose your will after a while because you have no choice. They're going to do to you what they're going to do to you, and you just give up. It's like, I guess, when you're breaking a horse or you're breaking an animal in to be domesticated. It felt like they were taking me from wild animal into just limp ragdoll. So once I went limp and stopped fighting, then I'm put into this dark tank of water and settled down into it. I remember tears were coming out of my eyes, tears rolling down the side of my face. And I know the water they put me in was body temperature. It wasn't hot or cold. It was just this nice middle temperature and relaxing. It was salt water. I remember it being salty and very dark. Really, really dark. And I drifted. I just felt like my spirit or my mind was drifting. And it started to get lighter. I don't know how to explain that. I'm in this dark, dark place, but in my mind or in my spirit, I start to lift, and then I'm in this white sort of realm.
On leur vend, en quelque sorte, une culture de l'accession à un nouveau niveau de conscience par la mortification de la chair. Il est question, pour libérer l'esprit, d'éteindre le corps. Pour éteindre le corps sans mourir, on va le saturer de sensations, de plaisir et de douleur, jusqu'à ce que les capteurs sensoriels disjonctent. Et alors là, quand vos capteurs sensoriels disjonctent, c'est le nirvana, c'est l'ascension spirituelle.
Nous disposons uniquement d'informations fragmentaires, mais nous avons une certitude.
My mom has multiple personality disorder. When she was diagnosed with this, I was in my early 20s. And I had separated from her for a period of time. I told her that I didn't want anything more to do with her until she got professional help. I knew that she was mentally disturbed because of years and years and years of abuse I'd gone through. I thought she maybe had schizophrenia or some sort of disorder along those lines. It was months later, after no contact with her, she called me one day and said, "Kim, I want to go for lunch with you. I need to tell you what's going on." She says, "Let's meet somewhere in public where it won't turn into a scream fest. There will be no mental abuse back and forth or emotional abuse or insults going back and forth." And I said, okay. So we go for lunch. And this is when she tells me that she was seeing a therapist for memories that were coming back from her childhood. And through the course of the therapy, they diagnosed her with multiple personality disorder, and she said that they had found 36 different personalities at that point. Multiple personalities is when a person's psyche is fragmented from trauma. It happens in childhood when the abuse and the trauma that they're experiencing is so intense that the child can't process what's happening when their bodies are going through that much pain and their minds are in that much confusion. And it's like taking a fragile mirror or a fragile piece of glass and dropping it. That child's psyche snaps And so the experience, the memory of the trauma is held in one of those fragments. The other fragment carries on as if it never happened. In order to cope, in order to survive day to day, they have to put a barrier. The mind puts a barrier. And the person who continues on day to day doesn't recall, doesn't remember the trauma experience. It was my grandfather who was committing crimes against my mom and against her siblings. The abuses were deep. They weren't run-of-the-mill spankings or yelling matches or being screamed at. We're talking trauma and torture at levels that even adults would struggle to be able to understand and cope with and survive with afterwards. She remembers being by her father, by men that he knew in the military that had formed this cult group after they came back from the war. These men would get together, hang out in basements, in garages like mechanic shops, in military base locations, Mawada armories in Calgary. And it wasn't just my mom and her siblings being tortured and abused, it was these other men's children as well. She remembers being taken into like a lodge type setting, like a moose lodge or an elk's lodge or something like that. And that the men were wearing masks, different types of masks and animal masks. They wanted her to renounce God, to say that God wasn't real, God didn't exist. And she had to say that God wasn't real and God wasn't going to help her. And she had to repeat this over and over again. She said that she was forced to defecate on a Bible, urinate on a Bible. I think that's very ritual. She retold a story of her dad coming home with a box of kittens. She was given a hammer and told to kill those kittens, and she couldn't do it. She refused to do it. She just kept dropping the hammer. He put a kitten in her lap, and she was told to strangle it, and she couldn't do it. She just shook, and she handed the cat over. Well, my grandfather ended up slaughtering the heads off of a few of those kittens in front of her, and then standing behind her, putting the hammer in her hand and taking his hand, putting it over hers, and forcing her to hammer on a kitten in a bag. I think the network is actually huge. With it being in the military, if my grandfather and his group was only one group, and they damaged my mom and her siblings, and the other members of the group were damaging their children, who also have siblings, and they have children. It's huge. It's just absolutely huge. The devastation, the number of families that are affected by this is a lot more than I think people realize. A lot of stuff going on behind closed doors, and people carrying on looking like they are living the white picket fence life. And my dad would bring my brother and I here, especially me, when my mom and dad broke up. Okay, my mom had been cheating on my dad. It was a really horrendous time in the family when her programming was breaking down, and he would, after work, realize what kind of mind state I was in, and we'd come here for dinner or go down into the bird sanctuary and go for walks. He had things that he'd put on the table that he'd want me to move. He was testing my telekinetic abilities and his own telekinetic abilities sitting at tables in this diner.
Okay, my name is Gregory Reid. I grew up out here in the San Fernando Valley, a little place called Canoga Park. I was born in 1954. and we lived in a hill community up here, and it was very secluded in a lot of ways. When I was somewhere around 5 or 6, still hard to get some real clarity, but I was brought into a group that was a mixture of and people that were involved in kind of an eclectic mix of black magic, druidism, witchcraft, and some other things thrown in. So some of my earliest memories are being a photo shoot of pornography. I'm not sure how many there were, 2 for sure. And then somewhere along the way, there were some other places and times where I was involved in ritualistic activity. One particular, I remember there was a number of people in animal masks chanting in a circle. But the one that's clearest to me is when I was somewhere about 8 or 9 years old. I went to a little church, and I met someone there who was a few years older than me, and he made friends with me, and we became pretty close. And on somewhere around the winter solstice I'm not sure exactly which year, but it was somewhere around between 62 and 64 probably. We were taken from the church to his house and then taken to somewhere in proximity of where I lived. And there was a rather sophisticated outdoor ritual which took place, in which my friend was murdered for the ritual. And from that point on, I was completely fragmented. I was sick for weeks after that, and my parents had returned to them a child that was completely not the child they knew. I was just a shell. I was just a complete mess. And I immediately began to plunge into the occult. I started drinking very heavily, and by the time I was 14 years old, I was spending all of my time locked in my room when I wasn't at school, practicing the occult, and mainly just wishing I was dead. And by the time I was 14, I felt like there was no way, if there was a God, that he could have loved me. And I wasn't sure where I was all going, but I had been very sure that I'd crossed over a line, and that I belonged to something complete opposite from God at that point. When they killed Mark, wherever we were, he was leaned up against a board like that. It was slanted back like this. It was almost completely upright, but they had him against that. That's how he died, is when he was up against a board like that. I don't know if it was actually on Christmas Eve, but it was a Christmas service that week. I went with a neighbor lady friend to church. We went through the service, and then afterwards, my lady friend, an older lady, she went home, and they put me in the car, and we drove up to Mark's house in Box Canyon. I remember being in the house. They had a little birthday cake, because I think it was Mark's birthday. And there was punch and stuff, and he came out of his room dressed in white. He had a white shirt and white slacks. And we drank the punch, and that's when everything went whacked. I remember being extraordinarily dizzy. We were put in the back of a car, big car, I think it was like a black Buick, probably about a 50 to 53, somewhere around there as far as I can remember. And we were driven to some place about 20 minutes away. It's hard to know, but I know we were driving out of Box Canyon towards Los Angeles. Mark was in the back seat with me. We were drifting in and out of some sort of drug sleep. And then we went to this place. It was an outdoor place with oak trees in a circle. And I remember that they took Mark. There was 2 women, maybe 3, that they took his shirt off, and they began to pour some sort of water or oil or something in flowers and rub it all over him. and they had him up against like a wooden slat sort of a thing. I'm not sure what it was. That's the only way I know how to describe it. There was a bonfire off to the left. And someone grabbed me, put a knife in my hand, put their hand around it, and shoved into Mark's chest. And I remember seeing the look of surprise on his face. Whatever we were on, we couldn't feel anything. All we could do is witness what was going on. We had no control over anything else. And then I was jerked away from there, and they took me to the side, and they me. I mean, I was about 8 or 9 years old at the time. And I briefly remember them carrying Mark off to the left. I assume they threw him in the fire. There's part of me that has a little flash of that, but it's really hard to go back there and actually visualize that. But that would be their way. That's what they do. And after that, it was just being sick for weeks. I don't remember anything for several weeks after that. All the fear's gone. All that's left now is the anger. The best I can tell based on what they did to me is they were grooming me to become a leader in this particular group to do the same thing to children that was done to me, to groom them, to raise them up to be in the power structure of this group. It could have been for Hollywood. I served all the attachments and all the connections were certainly there. But one thing I'm very convinced of is they had deliberately groomed me to be up the food chain. But the programming fell apart, so whatever they'd invested in me just was for nothing for them. And the house went all the way back up there. But that was his studio, his little
Tell me
studio.
about the photographer.
He's the one that took the family photos, but he was a very famous photographer in the 20s and 30s. He did photos for all of the famous actresses of the time, nude photos. And he also did some of the photography shoots of the shoots in this little studio here. His wife had a lobotomy, so she was had the mind of a 10-year-old. And after he died, she just lost it. She was so frightened that she just covered the whole house with crayon scriptures all over the house. And she was actually, had gone with me to church the night that my friend Mark died. She went to church, but she didn't go with us after there. But this is where they lived. It was like a 3 or 4 story house. Creepy looking. I was born with stuff because my grandmother was involved in the occult in Pasadena back in the 30s. I don't know that my mom really had much to do with that, but I was an open vessel. I always remembered as a child having out-of-body experiences, not knowing what they were, where I'd literally leave the house and then come back and get slammed back into my body. It's happened repeatedly. After the incident with Mark, it sparked something. It's like it awakened something. And this may or may not be appropriate, but I don't share this a lot, but I want to say this because it's important. A lot of the stuff I went through was so difficult because it was so humiliating and so damaging to me. But I only learned later that some of the things that they did to me were for a purpose. You know, why would people, even in the magical world, why would they take an 8-year-old child? Well, I found out from somebody who is in a great position to know what these groups do. That's actually what they call a magic mirror. They take a child, a male child specifically, so that they can call on demonic things to control that child, and it makes that child a tool of divination. After they did what they did to me, a couple of times, I was wide open to divination.
But we were at a house that was way up in the hills, and it was like they had a big fire set up. There's like an altar up there, and I remember they had a little boy and a little girl up there. They were tortured. They were maybe 4 or 5 years old, and they were burning them with stuff and they'd cut their wrists and their feet, the bottoms of their feet open, and they're collecting the blood. And these kids, and so they're some of those kids screaming.
I was up in Klatsk, and we went down to Newburgh to party one time, and when I was down there, I was at this guy named Willie's apartment, his Uncle Ralph's apartment, and we were all partying over there. And there's some people that I'd never met or hung out with before showed up over there. We went to this guy named Damien's house, which Damien's nickname was 666.
Well, take me down to the place. Have you been back here since? Okay, you did all right?
Yeah. And the one guy, I don't even know his name, but he'd said that he owned the 2 girls that were there. And I thought he meant like he was their pimp or something. And he kept asking if I wanted to buy one of them. And, like to rent her? No, to buy it. You want to buy her. Like you can own her. And I couldn't really grasp it, like how do you just buy somebody else? It didn't make sense to me. This is the house that the dope was bought at. I sat right there for about 45 minutes waiting for Mike to come out, and he took so long, and I was so sketched out that I took off, and I made it down to about here, and I saw him running down the street behind me, waving his arms, jumping up and down. So I stopped, he ran up the car, got in. We proceeded to go back to Willie's uncle's house, his apartment. And then we got there, and everybody was getting high and stuff, and there was just regular like partying going on. And I snorted a bunch of crank, and about 15 minutes later, everything started getting really weird. Like, just, like, weird. Like, it just felt weird. Like, they gave me something that was not crank. And they took me over to this guy, Dennis's apartment, which was only like second or third time I'd ever met this guy. And that's when I was sitting there, and I was like, man, why are you guys doing this? And he just looked me straight in the eyes and says, to let Satan have his night of rain. Then Willie got mad, like, don't say that, you're gonna, mess. And so then I don't remember. Like, the next thing I really recall is at that point when the next thing I recalled was just being led back into the apartment, and it was just so weird the way, they're like leading me, like, and kind of like babying me and stuff. And then the 2 girls stripped me down and put me in the shower. And they were washing me, and I remember I was covered from head to toe in blood, and I kept asking, I'm looking down and the water's just pink, just cascading down me, and I kept asking him, like, why am I bleeding? And don't worry, it's not your blood. It's not your, and, well, whose blood is it? Don't worry about it, and so they got me washed up, and, I'm pretty much in I'm pretty sure I was in shock at this point, but, I had no recollection of what had gone on, but I just had a feeling in my spirit, like, I don't even know if it was in my spirit, but I just knew I had to get out of there. And they put me in the bedroom, and they locked the door from the outside with a padlock on it. And the window in the bedroom also had a lock on it, with like a smaller padlock. And locked me in this bedroom right here. And then I broke out of the window. I popped. They had a lock on it. I pulled as hard as I could, and I remember it shot up, it hit the ceiling, ricocheted over, and hit the closet door, and then I could hear them fumbling, trying to get the padlock that they had on the outside of the door open, and I dove through the window and ran down the alley. But I somehow made it out to the street and all the way across the vacant, the whole lot that was vacant, and into a church parking lot. And I went to the church doors and tried to get in, and it was locked up. It was 4 or 5 in the morning, and it was early Sunday mornings. What I will explain here in a little bit happened Saturday night, and so there was a van parked in the parking lot there. I had to hide. I knew I had to hide because I was running from him, and I jammed my fingers up under here, which I have no idea how I did it, and I just pulled, and the window shattered, and then I just crawled through the window. I said that was early Sunday morning, and everybody shows up to go to church the next day, and I believe the pastor showed up before anybody else and saw the broken window, so we called the police, and they came to, I woke up to the police outside the van. Well, it looks like they were trying to steal parts, and so at which point I sat up in the front seat and was promptly arrested. And so when I was being taken to jail, I guess it was my friend Bubba's cousin Mark that was the arresting officer, and he said that I kept babbling about dead kids, and I didn't, at that point, I didn't really have any recollection. I got out of jail, and I went and got my car, and it was a couple of days that everything started kind of coming back to me, and I thought I was crazy for a long time, because that's not normal stuff that happened to someone. It was just hit me like a wave, and I remembered what had been done, and I'd been taken to, I don't know where we were at. I don't know how we got there, but I remember there was a pretty good sized group of people. I'd say between 30 and 50 people that were there. And the place that we're at was, you could tell just, it was one of their regular spots, just the way that the grounds were kept and the whole setup of it, they had a big fire pit down below, and then there's 2 sets of stairways that went up on the sides, and then they had a big altar up there, and they had a little boy and a little girl chained down the altar, and they were torturing them, and they'd stab them. I remember they were cutting the bottoms of their feet open, and just the noises that these kids made, and the smell, I'll never forget that, and just the torment and the torture they put these kids through. And you've talked with a lot of people that have been through stuff like this. How do most people cope with this stuff? Because I kept this inside for years, until I came back to Ohio and told you guys about it. I think it only told maybe 4 people in my life, because I was so ashamed of it, I was so ashamed that I didn't do anything to help those kids. But, how? What do you do?
A lot of people split. A lot of people become drug addicts. A lot of people, they do a lot of things. A lot of people don't get help because there's not enough help.
They finally and whatnot, and then after that they took the kids off, and they were eating parts of them, and stuff, and then they took me down in like a basement room, and they had the two little kids laying on like a table deal, and they were laying there just, just looking all grotesque, and they told me, like, if you ever tell anybody about this is what your family's gonna look like. And then I remember I was in just a big circle of people, and I was crawling around on my hands and knees, and I was naked, and they were urinating on me and throwing feces on me, and I was covered in blood, and I just remember crawling around just begging them to stop and please, they just kept going, and then the next thing I know is they're leading me back into Willie's uncle's apartment, and they put me in the shower, but it just, I don't know where we were, I just know that night, pretty much ruined my life for a long time. And I know, like, anybody that's involved in Satanism, that has been abused, the only thing that's going to help you is Jesus. Jesus Christ is the only thing that will help you and take the hurt away and take the pain out. The only thing that works is Jesus.